Hi, welcome to ML Buchman's 5 Insider Factoids, and these are answers to some of the questions that people have come up with as they've read Guard the East Flank, the new Night Stalkers book. So we're going to jump right in. It's the Night Stalkers Reload #1. Warning, there are spoilers in my discussion here. So let's go for it. The Return of Emily. Now this is huge. I mean, she created the Emily Beale universe. It was 40 by the time it was done, it was 42 books and 70 short stories. She was in a lot of them. She was the reason for a lot of them. I have no idea how I created this heroine, but she launched my career and I love her for it. Uh, but what had happened was there were a couple things going on that has led to basically a 9-year absence. One was she sort of disappeared into the background of some of the stories. Her life was becoming her life instead of all this drama. She had kids, she was settled back on the ranch, she was running a little intelligence bureau on the ranch. So she's sitting at Henderson's Ranch, and it was hard to come up with stories that I felt were new and fresh, that had new romance elements, that had new excitement that I hadn't already worked through in different stories and different novels. And I wanted to try something new. I wanted to try something that would sort of refresh my brain. And what happened was I stumbled on an idea for my Miranda Chase thriller character. She's the lead, an autistic lead investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board. She specializes in air crashes. And so I moved on to air crashes in um, military environments with geopolitical ramifications, which she can't understand because she's autistic. So I got to go down to this very tight, very narrow place in her and her team's heads and write thrillers, write things that were action oriented, action focused. And it kind of let the romance sort of chill in the background because I felt I'd sort of told all the different love stories I could think of at that time. So why does she come back now? Miranda Chase series is doing great. Thank you very much to readers. Um, and what happened was Emily cropped up and said, "Hey, I've got a story." And she wouldn't tell me what the story was, of course, but it was sort of the first time the character had spoken to me in any depth in years. Um, Definitely since White House Protection Force, and possibly since she left the Firehawks. So it was a real chance for me to go in and go, oh, let's see what's happened. She's grown a lot since then. She's changed a lot. The world has changed a lot. And so it felt like it was a really good opportunity to bring Emily back and play around a bit. I did do a lot of debate. Was this Night Stalkers #12? Was this its own series? How to handle that? And she answered pretty definitively that the Night Stalkers Reload is her loading up again and getting ready to take command of the Night Stalkers. So it sort of had to be its own object. So that's why it's a new series. So one of the fun things that was going on in this was I wanted to keep everything relevant. And back in 2012, when The Night Is Mine, Emily Beale's The Night Stalkers #1 came out, she was the first one. She was the woman who was so good they couldn't keep her out. And at that time, there were U.S. national laws that women could not serve in forward combat. So they couldn't be a fighter pilot. They could be a transport pilot. They ended up in conflict, but it was because they'd gone in as an interpreter to assist in Iraq and Afghanistan and gotten involved without the training. So they got in way over their heads. There's a fascinating history about Team Lioness who went in with very high level troops without any training other than how to translate and speak to the women, which the men couldn't do, and then ending up in the war. Uh, that's gone. About a year after the book came out, the Secretary of Defense threw that out. And yes, there have been a lot of challenges of integrating women into these spec op services, partly because the physical demands are so extreme and getting worse. Um, the more technology they carry, the more batteries they have to carry. The more capable the technology is, the more they can do. So they're more technology. And now they have, want to carry some drones with them so they can look over the next hill without having to hike over the next hill and things like that. So this has all evolved quite a bit. And so I wanted to look at Emily's viewpoint, which is in many ways dated. I wrote it back in 2006 originally, and it eventually sold and got edited and published in 2012. So it had a 6-year life to get launched. This was a chance to go in and go, how is this world, this very narrow world of Special Operations Helicopter Regiment, the 160th SOAR, uh, how has it changed? How has it evolved? And so we have a couple in the midst of it, and we have the old guard of Emily Beale with her possibly overly set ways. One of the other aspects of keeping relevant is courtesy of the Ukraine-Russian war. Uh, War has changed. It's changed so drastically in the last 24 months because it's the first time that we're seeing this kind of warfare versus what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're seeing intense drone involvement. We're seeing a lot of satellite surveillance being critical to the action that they're taking. Whole rafts of equipment that the U.S. had geared up and was ordering and had gotten through at least the design phase, and pilot vehicles were built. They had to cancel a ton of contracts because they were no longer relevant to how war has evolved. So one of the big questions I had for myself, and I love questions because that gives me meat for the book. One of the big questions I had was, how do the Night Stalkers have to evolve? And that's the Night Stalkers Reload for me. That's when it really became its own series. I want to look at and think about and make myself think about, my characters think about, how does this changing world that we're seeing in this, call it a microcosm for the moment, of Russia, Ukraine, how do we see that ripple across warfare in the future and in other places and in other locales? Because there's always war going on. I mean, I know 4 or 5 right at the moment that are occurring that are big enough to be called wars. Um, and this is just the most visible one. So it's just fascinating how something that thought we understood so well is kind of getting thrown out the window and having to be rethought. So if this book series continues, which I kind of expect it to, I don't have the next idea yet, but I'm sure by next year, Emily will force another one down my throat. Um, I'm going to keep watching how the people have to evolve and how their units have to evolve and their thinking has to evolve to keep moving forward in the modern world. So it's just, can you tell I'm excited by this series? So the cast, I wanted to make it personal and really personal. So um, if you go back and look at all of the prior Night Stalkers books, they are personal. They're about the relationship, and they're really focused on, are they good enough? Are they in the right place? Can they pull off this mission? Are they sufficiently qualified? Getting past their doubts. But I wanted to have somebody who's just torn and Captain Troy Ryland is the one who won the prize. And he has three big issues, and I purposely set them up to tear him in three different directions so that we get to feel some of his pain. And I didn't dig too deep because it's still a romance and a military suspense and all that, but I liked going in and making it more personal, and I think I can pull it off because I'm a better writer than I was. Oh my God, I started writing Emily Beale 18 years ago. I had not done the math until this moment. Um, so anyway, yeah, I've learned a few things since then, hopefully. One of the other things I looked at in the cast was the crossovers. Bringing in Emily wasn't enough. I wanted to give it depth and connection and see how people had evolved and how people had changed. And I ended up getting, well, you'll see through the book, but having Trisha come back in at a high level. And I brought her in because she was always one of Emily's closest to a friend she probably allowed outside of Henderson's Ranch, and definitely within the military. And, and so I wanted to see how the two of them would interact because they're such different personalities. But Trisha is also the goddess of chaos, and chaos brings about change. And so we're in a changing war environment, changing action structure environment. Trisha seemed like the perfect person to throw in there. And then I needed a team to go out on this mission. And it was just fun. I started thinking Rafe and Julian always made me laugh when I wrote them, but they were always in the background, even in the final book. They made me laugh. The Target of One's Own, Night Stalkers 11, which was originally the 5e number 4. Little sidetrack here. The first 7 books of the Night Stalkers, The Night Is Mine through By Break of Day, were sold to a publishing house. They published them. They had the rights, and I had no control on them. So I couldn't do a discount for marketing. I couldn't package them into sets. I couldn't. There was a whole lot of things I couldn't do because I didn't have the rights. So I created the 5e, which were supposed to come right on the back side of the first 7, but I didn't have those rights. So I made it the separate series called the 5e. When I got the rights to the first 7 back, that's when I could finally take the 2 set, get this inside the picture frame here, and get them married back up together. So it became the whole set. So bringing Rafe and Julian back from what became the Night Stalkers number 11, where it was originally intended to be, Target of One's Own. There, has that for a long side loop. I also I needed some Delta Force people. I've got this great team out there. I don't know how they evolved. I didn't know what they were up to. I just wanted to check in. And so bringing them along on this adventure into Russia, it was like, okay, we get just these little snippets of them. So maybe we'll see them step back in later books. I sort of wanted to set that stage where the uh, the Night Stalkers and the Firehawks and the Delta Force and the White House Protection Force were all very separated objects, and they didn't cross over very much or very deeply. And the Night Stalkers Reload I see as more of a cap kind of a series, so it'll pick up characters from each of these series and or new ones from each of these series to try to give it a more rich and realistic flavor. So that's what's going on with all these crossovers, sort of ducking through the back of the book. Plus, I haven't written anything on any of them for almost 5 years because of Miranda. I wanted to see where they were. I wanted to see what they were up to. And the way I do that as an author isn't sitting there and thinking about it. It's by writing and then, oh, here come Richie and Melissa walking in on stage and Jody being her, didactic self, and Stan being the big wounded but friendly bear dog. And so it was just fun to play with these people and see how they had evolved with time. Because with only a few exceptions, all my books occur in real time. So if I wrote a book 7 years ago, that hero and heroine are now 7 years older. And so if they reappear, they're going to be older in the book. They're going to have moved, their lives will have moved on 7 years. Uh, I hope I get to still be writing in, another 30 years and see just how crazy some of these people become and change. But anyway, that's what's going on with the cast. The mission was a hard one, and it's because I didn't want to get in to somewhere that we're having a lot of trouble. I didn't want to write about the Ukraine-Russian war. I didn't want to write about North Korea. For this series, I wanted to stay back with the romance and the people. They still have to have global adventures, though, because that's what the Night Stalkers does. They don't do anything on U.S. soil. They do it out there, and they do it very secretively, and they're called in only when you have to do something very secretive. So where to send them that would show they were relevant, would put on pressure to evolve, but wasn't having them go undercover into the Congolese war or the Sudanese disaster or, you know, any of these other pieces. And I I'm not quite sure how I got there. I think I was watching a video and saw um, I was looking up ejection seats for something in Miranda. That was it. I was looking up ejection seats for something in Miranda, and because she's always got people in trouble when bouncing out of jets and such. And I knew there was actually two helicopters out there that had ejection seats. And they're both Russian. And so I started looking at those ejection seats, and then I started going, how can I need to use the ejection seats? And I didn't know what it was, but I had the Russian helicopter. Well, if you're going to have a Night Stalker in a Russian helicopter, it's because they're going into Russia. And they're doing it undercover. So that started setting things up. Uh, and how could I address the Ukraine war and our intent to help the Ukrainians without sending military direct action teams in, which at this point we aren't doing. We're only sending equipment, supposedly. I'm sure we have teams on the ground advising, but not that I've been able to find any trace of, nor would I expect to be able to. But one of the big things is that Russia doesn't have enough artillery shells and missiles. They've run out. And so they're buying them from Iran and North Korea. So they're being built in North Korea. They're coming up and being shipped all the way across the Trans-Siberian Railroad, across the longest country in the world, over through 9 time zones in order to be used in the Ukraine war. How do we interrupt that? And there have been a lot of attacks on the Trans-Siberian Railroad to try to interrupt it, but the Russians have gotten really good at fixing the railroad each time some activist blows up a piece of it. And it typically takes them a day or two. How do I make up something that will take longer to damage or destroy or inhibit or hold them back? And that's where I came up with, from my high school physics lab, passing a magnet through a piece of wire creates a current. And I started tinkering with that idea and came up with I wanted an electromagnetic pulse to destroy the electronics in the North Korean missiles as the train is passing them down the track. So that's how that came up. It started with I wanted a helicopter into Russia, I wanted Ukraine, but I didn't. That's the way an author's brain actually works. That was the convoluted path. And finally, one of the things that's kind of in the background, but I wanted to really look at. Um, some of you may know about 6 years ago, I tried to move to the UK, uh, go for 5 years, and I didn't get the visa at the last minute. So I was traveling across the country. My wife and I were headed to the UK. Barrister said, yeah, you're pretty good. It should be fine. Should come through in another week. Literally, we're an hour out of meeting a friend um, in New England. We were from Washington State, and we found out we didn't get the visa, and there was no way to appeal. So we've been paying a lot of attention to the UK, and we still do. We like going there. We vacation there fairly often, and fairly often, 3 times. Um, they've had horrible, horrible problems. I think somebody was watching out for us when we didn't get there because Brexit happened shortly afterward. And suddenly the farms couldn't get farm workers because they were Poles who were coming in as part of the EU, but they didn't want to cross the channel because they didn't know if they'd be let back in. And everything just has come apart on the farming community in the UK. Well, that got me thinking about the US farming. I mean, it is so hard for these people to survive. The suicide rate among farmers is cataclysmic, literally cataclysmic in the UK. All the smallholders, feed price has gone up by a factor of 3, fertilizer by a factor of 5, seed price has gone up 2 to 3 times. How are they supposed to make a living? They were barely break even before. Um, so I wanted to have somebody who was in that trap, but in the US. And again, we're all the way back to that first person that I chose to keep it personal, which is Captain Troy Ryland. And I researched a lot about the plight of farmers and the challenges of farmers who aren't in super agribusinesses. And I was really nice and really gentle because what they have is so much worse than I put in the book. The trap is so much worse. Um, you go to make an organic farm, you're next to an agribusiness. If the wind blows the seed from the agribusiness with its engineered crops into your organic field, and the agribusiness comes in and tests it and says, oh, look, you're growing one of our plants, they can then sue you out of existence and take your farm after you're forced to foreclose, and they take over the land. I mean, that's just one of the things that happens to our farmers. And so I wanted to show some of these challenges and some of the questions that I think we'll probably explore more in future books, not just the farming, but the different aspects of how people are trying to figure out how to live with the government that, in this case, they're fighting to defend. So anyway, these are some of the pieces that went into building this book and giving it the depth that it's got. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any other questions, feel free to ping me. Go to my website, mlbuchman.com. There's a bonus story. There's a recipe from the story. You can contact me with any questions, all sorts of good stuff. So thanks so much for watching. See you next time.